Welcome back to the GCN Racing News Show. This week, yet another photo finish at the men's Amstel Gold. A clear-cut but surprise winner in the women's, a breakdown of an enthralling final stage of the Tour of the Basque Country, plus the men's and women's Scheldeprijs and the opening stage of the Tour of Turkey. This week in the world of racing, we learnt that Tim Merlier put himself into the barriers at the end of Scheldeprijs, although he had to in order to avoid the riders coming towards him as he rode the wrong way down the start-finish straight. We also learnt that even the best riders have to get off their bikes and run. This is Alexander Vlasov and Jonas Vingegaard racing to the line in the Tour of the Basque Country after crashing with 15 metres to go. And finally, we learnt that pro cyclists are miniature, at least if these beers at Amstel Gold are anything to go by. That was Marta Cavalli and Michał Kwiatkowski on the podium, having won their respective races. For Kwiatkowski, that was his second Amstel Gold win, 7 years after he outsprinted a group of 17 to the line. The manner with which he won it this year, though, was much different, and to show you how, I'm going back to the touchscreen. The first big move containing some fairly big names came from Nathan van Hooijdonk and Victor Campenaerts, who bridged across to the early breakaway of the day. This next couple of clips, nothing to do with how the race was won, but I found it bizarre how many times Victor Campenaerts needed to empty his bladder. This is the first time that we saw with 72 kilometres to go. Less than 10 kilometres later, or just over should I say, he's at it again. Must be a big drinker or something, not quite sure. But then he has to go again a little bit later on. First up though, he is dropped from that group that he has bridged across to, let's not forget, with Ida Skelling here of Bora Hansgrohe. Now I'm not sure if it was his legs. Adam Blythe on commentary didn't think it was. He didn't look under too much pressure, or whether it was team orders. But nevertheless, before he gets caught by the main peloton, he decides he needs another leak. Answers on a postcard as to why he needed so many in such a short period of time. But on to how the race was won, and the first key point for me comes here. 48 kilometres to go. Now this road is always crucial in Amstel Gold. Normally they come to it from a big wide main road and it's a sprint into the left-hander that takes them into the narrow one. This year they came from it at a slightly different route. So it wasn't quite that same sprint, but nevertheless still extremely important. Ineos Grenadiers knew this and they clearly had a plan to go into it in the front positions and to really drill it on the front with Ben Turner, who was once again rider of the day, man of the match. There's a sequence of 90-degree corners at this point that leads him into the next climb. This is a right-hand bend. In just a few moments' time, you'll see another 90-degree left that's even sharper over a bridge. So it really strings the peloton out if you go to the front and really start sprinting as hard as you can. That's the left-hand turn over the bridge, and if I pause it in just a few moments' time, once Ben Turner has sprinted out the other side, you can see there are a number of gaps opening up. Michael Matthews with a gap back to the Jumbo-Visma rider behind, another gap here and another gap here. Mathieu van der Poel in around about 10th position. So a really good job by the Ineos Grenadiers and likewise by Ben Turner. Now it worked out that from the moment that he hit the front to the moment that he finished on the front was 15 kilometres. Didn't get a single turn from anybody else, which made it even more bizarre to see Tim Wellens attack here. This is the rider from Lotto Soudal. We've still got Ben Turner with plenty of energy left, 43 kilometres to go, and he's attacking on a slight descent. I have absolutely no idea what he thought he was going to achieve here, because all he did achieve was allow Ben Turner a little bit of a rest and a slipstream behind him as he caught back up. Answers on a postcard again as to why Tim Wellens attacked at that particular point. He was caught soon after, and Ben Turner continued to ride on the front for quite a long time after that. Until, in fact, we got to the hardest and steepest climb of the final part of the race. 15 kilometres on the front, hats off to Ben Turner, but at this point Michał Kwiatkowski takes over with Tom Pidcock on his wheel. Now Amstel Gold, like Flanders, it's really important that you go into the climbs in the front positions. Not in 15th, not in 25th, but right at the front, because you can cause some serious damage, and that is exactly what Michał Kwiatkowski did at the foot. Off the back of that pace though, it's Tiesj Benoot who goes off the front. Tom Pidcock very quick to react, but we saw a few moments ago that a rider that didn't look too good was Mathieu van der Poel. You can see him there on the right-hand side of Benoît, gradually slipping back. On the side-on shot, you can see just how much trouble he is in. We'll get to that now. Look, we've got 6 riders here at the front, the last of those being Dylan Teuns. A gap back to Kwiatkowski, Michael Matthews, Stefan Kung, Alexander Kamp, and Mathieu van der Poel at the back of that group. He looked like he was suffering, but whilst we didn't see those favourites go over the top of the climb, a matter of a couple of hundred metres later, he managed to make his way back on. So in the end, we are left with a group of 11 very strong riders at the front, and they work pretty well together, which they need to do because it's a long way to the next climb, which is the Cowberg. Now, I'm not going to go over that climb because not a whole lot happened. It's over here. But the big move happened over the top. This is Michał Kwiatkowski doing something that I see him do quite a lot. You'll see him assess the riders over his right-hand shoulder whilst still pressing on the pedals quite hard. It's a surreptitious attack, and it looks like he's going to get caught straight away by Dylan Teuns, but the Belgian has already followed and made a couple of moves over the top of the climb. He quickly flicks his elbow out to Mark Hirschi, and later we see Van der Poel also moving to one side, wanting somebody else to close the gap. Pidcock is straight on the radio, and Michał Kwiatkowski has a gap. The next moment is this one. Left-hand bend at the end of a descent. If I roll it on just slightly further, you can see that 2 riders here are caught out on the right-hand side. Tiesj Benoot and Agi Deuxer's Benoît Cosnefroy, and it scrubs quite a lot of speed out from them. They've got some gaps to make up after this point, but they do get themselves back up to speed, and Cosnefroy uses that speed to go straight past the group and straight up towards Michał Kwiatkowski at the front of the race. It wasn't planned, obviously, but that slingshot effect meant that he was going so fast past that group that nobody wanted to react. On to the next clip, and this is a point where I think that Tom Pidcock almost loses the race for the Ineos Grenadiers. It's over the top of the climb where Cosnefroy bridged across to Kwiatkowski, and there's been a few attacks, so it has been hard, but Pidcock thinks he can go across without taking anybody with him. Only he did it into a corner, and so Dylan Teuns was pretty quick to react to this. And I think by this point now, Pidcock's already realising that this was not a good move. It's only 7 seconds to his teammate at the front, so he sits up, but Dylan Teuns goes straight round Pidcock and tries to bridge across to the front. It didn't happen, but Ineos Grenadiers and Pidcock were pretty lucky that Teuns didn't manage to bridge to the front. Right, let's go and have a look at the final sprint because Cosnefroy and Michał Kwiatkowski managed to stay clear all the way to the finish. You can see here that Cosnefroy kicks with just over 200 metres to go. He does open a small bit of daylight between himself and the pole behind him, but Kwiatkowski's patient. He knows that this is a long sprint to the line. He goes with just over 100 metres to go, but he struggles to get alongside Cosnefroy. The overhead shot at this point didn't really give us a clear idea, though, of who'd actually won. But moments later, Cosnefroy was told he'd got it. Now, this would have come, I'm pretty sure, from race radio and therefore the UCI commissaires, but before we'd seen the photo finish on TV. But then we did see the photo finish, and whilst close, it was clear that Kwiatkowski's bike throw had got his tyre in front of Cosnefroy's. So the elation of Cosnefroy quickly turned to immense disappointment, and the disappointment of Kwiatkowski quickly turned to elation. This is what it meant to him to take that win.
And now I'm here, winner of Amstel Gold Race, so that's incredible. But to be honest, it was very difficult. Beginning of the season, very difficult spring so far. I've been sick, a couple of times. My wife, my daughter, and going through those moments. I never gave up, but it was very tough. So being here is just big relief.
Very easy to forget, isn't it, that riders are up against it behind the scenes, but with so much sickness in the peloton and outside of it at the moment, always nice to be reminded that it's rarely plain sailing for pro riders en route to their big goals. Tiesj Benoot took 3rd place on the day, even though he wasn't really shown crossing the finish line, whilst Van der Poel had to settle for 4th. Ride of the day, though, for me, had to be Alexander Kamp of Trek Segafredo. He matched the best on the climbs and ended up taking 5th on the day. On to the women's then, and back over to the touchscreen. I'll start with a couple of shots we didn't have on our coverage, but that we've been sent since, and you can see that the race was incredibly hard from before the midway point off it. At this point, we've got three incredibly strong riders, Van Vleuten, Nieuwiadoma and Vollering, probably the three favourites to take the race on the day. And they're on their own with a 10-second gap with 63 k's to go. But as you can see, they're arguing. There's absolutely no cohesion, so they get caught by a group that also contains Ellen van Dijk behind. If they had worked well together, and if it hadn't been for UAE doing a great chase behind them, that could have been the race done and dusted for all of the riders that are in this main peloton behind. As it was, it did come back together. Before I get on to how Marta Cavalli actually won the race though, I wanted to highlight the amazing work that was done by the Cuban national champion Arlena Sierra of Team Movistar. This is her bridging across to a dangerous move where lots of teams were represented. As you can see, SD Works, Team DSM, Jumbo-Visma at the front, Trek Segafredo with Balsamo, the world champion. She's at it again a few moments later, following the moves in the main peloton after that group was caught. And then when Team Bike Exchange go off the front with Amanda Spratt, who responds? Arlena Sierra. All this despite the fact that she crashed early on in the race. We'll see in a few moments' time that she had a lot of skin off the right-hand side of her leg, a few rips in her shorts, etc. We hadn't initially seen the crash, but again, we've been sent that. It was quite a nasty one that happened earlier on in the race. This is it now. You can see Arlena Sierra, the first to go down, pretty heavy she went down as well, taking a couple of Movistar riders down with her, which makes it all the more remarkable what she was able to do in the race. Now that group containing Spratt also had Paulina Royackers at the front. They were caught inside 10 kilometres from the finish. Even then, Arlena Sierra somehow had the strength to get back to the front of the main peloton at the most crucial point of the race, the foot of the Cowberg. Now, unfortunately, Van Vleuten had lost the wheel of her teammate by this point, but you will see that she goes around this corner, look over her shoulder, Van Vleuten's not there, and so she sits up. But what an incredible ride by Arlena Sierra yesterday. Right, on to how Marta Cavalli won this race. Now, it's always really interesting, sorry, that's the wrong clip. It's always really interesting to look at where the winning rider was, knowing who'd won the race afterwards. But what is also interesting here is that FDJ Nouvelle Aquitaine, on this penultimate climb of the Bemelerberg, are completely absent. In a few moments' time, I'll pause the overhead shot and you'll see that of 20 riders that we've got from the helicopter shots, there is not one from FDJ Nouvelle Aquitaine Futuroscope. Here we go, 20 riders in shots, all the big teams represented except for the French squad. Now we understand that Cavalli had been on race radio to her sports director earlier in the race to say she wasn't feeling very good, but something must have changed from that point to the final decisive climb of the Cowberg. She's quite easy to pick out, Marta Cavalli, because she was still wearing leg warmers, toe warmers and arm warmers, out for a nice Sunday afternoon ride around the Netherlands. But she's got herself into a really good position at that point, as you can see from the overhead shot here. Annemiek van Vleuten of Movistar doing absolutely everything she can to distance the riders behind her. Cavalli in around about 7th or 8th place. Great ride, I've got to say, by Liana Lippert of Team DSM. She was glued to van Vleuten's wheel all the way up, and even Demi Vollering was starting to struggle. So here you can see the group assemble themselves as they get towards the top of the Cowberg, and in the next overhead shot, I will pause it. 7 rides in total, but 2 of them are from SD Works, Ashley Moolman-Pasio and Demi Vollering. And keep your eye on Demi Vollering, because just in a few moments' time, she gets onto the race radio to speak to Ashley Moolman-Pasio, tell her what the situation is and also what to do. Moolman-Pasio then assesses the situation herself, looking over her right-hand shoulder at just the moment that Marta Cavalli is going alongside her. Because the Italian came from the back of the group, by this point, I reckon she was going twice the speed of the South African rider when she went past. So by the time Moolman-Pasio realises what happened, by the time she starts riding on the front, that gap, what's that, 7, maybe 8 bike lengths by this point. And if we go to the motorbike camera shot in a few moments' time, you will see just how bad the moment was that Ashley Moolman-Pasio looked over her right-hand shoulder to see where her teammate Demi Vollering was. It couldn't have been worse timed, even though it really wasn't Ashley Moolman-Pasio's fault. Now you've got to remember also that all the riders are deep into the red by this point in the race and over the top of the Cowberg. So it's not just a case of saying, chase on the front and bring Marta Cavalli back before the line. At the same time, you've got to tip your hat off to the Italian, because that was a very well-timed attack and also a very strong attack. So a well-deserved victory for her at Amstel Gold after her afternoon out training in leg warmers. That marks just the third win as a pro rider for Marta Cavalli, but she has been knocking on the door for quite a long time. I reckon that last year I had her as my outsider for a big win about 3 or 4 times, so it was only a matter of time before she finally did win big. Behind her was a very disappointed Demi Vollering at SD Works in second place. She's got a few more one-day races to make up for it though. But given their strength in numbers, you wonder where it went wrong for SD Works. Let's find out from Marlon Rusa what their tactics were.
I don't know. Actually, really, I don't know if I can tell. I asked my friend, hey Chantal, can we tell what was our plan or don't we do this?
We can always tell our plan.
Yeah, can we say?
Because it didn't work out.
Well, that's cleared that up. Notable by their absence from the race were Marianne Vos, winner last year, and Tour of Flanders winner Lotte Kopecky, both of whom chose to skip Amstel Gold in preference of preparing for Paris-Roubaix this Saturday. We'll see if that pays off for them. Right, I shall move on now to the Tour of the Basque Country, which always produces some of the hardest and most exciting racing of the season. Primoz Roglic took the opening time trial ahead of Evenepoel on Monday, keeping his unbeaten record in that discipline in Spain. But the rest of the race didn't see the best of Roglic. 2 uphill sprints followed, but whilst Alaphilippe took victory the following day, Bilbao on stage 3, Martinez on stage 4, Roglic was not picking up the bonus seconds that he usually mops up with ease. Now, it turned out that he had an injury throughout the race that was causing him pain, which perhaps explains why he just watched on as this decisive move went up the road on the penultimate day. Vlasov, Martinez, Bilbao, Mas, Izagirre, all following a strong attack from Remco Evenepoel. Now, thankfully for Jumbo-Visma, Vingegaard did also make it up the road, although Vlasov was less thankful for that. This is a reminder of what happened on those incredibly steep slopes to the line.
25 metres to go. Just about turns that gear over. What his big back wheel goes, but he takes the stage win. What a win by Carlos Rodriguez of the Ineos Grenadiers.
It's going to be 1 and 2.
It's a 1 and 2.
Oh, and Vlasov.
Vlasov has fallen on. It's just so slippery. So steep, so slippery, and a chaotic finale. Vlasov having to run with his bike across the line there.
And
Vingegaard too. Well, it's not very often you see riders do that.
That particular stage was won by Carlos Rodriguez of Ineos Grenadiers, his first as a pro rider. Now, he'd been away with Marc Soler of UAE Team Emirates, but because the UAE rider was a threat on the GC, team orders forced Rodriguez to sit on. He then attacked his compatriot later in the stage and soloed to the win, but he was very quick to praise Soler, who he described as the strongest of them that day. The results that day saw Evenepoel take the GC lead from Roglic, but with Dani Martinez just 2 seconds down, there was everything to play for going into the final brutal stage. Now, the main action there came on the hardest and the steepest climb. Ineos had been controlling for much of the day, but it was Roglic who made the first big attack, drawing Martinez, Mas and Vlasov out with him. Now, at this point, Evenepoel did what he so often does, just set his own rhythm and his own pace. And I've got to say, he did a brilliant job. Steep gradients are Evenepoel's kryptonite, but he was only 15 seconds behind his rivals over the top of that climb. The point of note here, though, is that in the background there, behind Evenepoel, is Pello Bilbao. Now, we didn't see him descend past the yellow jersey, but he must have been flying. All of a sudden, he caught the front group and gone straight to the front. The pressure that he then puts on caused Mas to make a mistake, crashing into the guardrail at the side of the road, and caused a split in the group. Martinez was one of those caught out, and so he and Evenepoel had a long, hard chase to get themselves back into contention. But that's exactly what they did, and the favourites were all together as they reached the final climb of the race. But before that, there was the small matter of an intermediate sprint. Now, this is where I think Evenepoel made a bit of a mistake. He started sprinting way before the line and ended up doing a big 30-second effort just before that final climb of the race. Now, admittedly, if Martinez had taken 3 seconds and Evenepoel none, he'd have been level on time with him on GC. But I think he could have just followed Martinez and either jumped round him before the line or just stayed in his wheel and only conceded 1 second to his closest rival. Now, we can't say whether or not that effort took enough out of him that he wasn't able to follow on the final climb, but it can't have helped. On that climb, Martinez played it perfectly. As soon as he knew Evenepoel was well distanced, he paced up the front knowing that those still with him were unlikely to be able to put enough time into him to be a threat on the GC. And that's exactly what happened. But there was still a stage win up for grabs, and that looked to be out of the question for Jon Izagirre after Vingegaard wiped him out whilst trying to avoid a spectator. But the Basque rider got back on his bike, back onto the group, and took an incredible stage victory. Martinez finished 4th on the day to secure the GC, but Evenepoel was only 24 seconds down. That, though, was enough for him to slip to 4th on the general classification. Now, he played it so well tactically all week, but I can't help but think that he might have played things differently at that intermediate sprint. Maybe you disagree. You can always let me know in the comments section just down below. Right, before we finish with the Basque Country, we'd like to say get well soon to Enric Mas and Lucas Hamilton, both of whom suffered nasty crashes. But most of all, our thoughts are with Jumbo-Visma's Milan Vader, who was in critical condition after crashing in the race. Now, thankfully, his condition became stable later that evening, but he will remain in hospital in Bilbao under observation. Get well soon, Milan. Earlier on in the week, we had been treated to one of the hardest editions of Scheldeprijs in a long time. High winds ripped through the men's peloton almost from the off, and the big surprise was that Quickstep Alpha Vinyl, who are normally specialists in crosswinds, didn't get a single rider in a front group of 14. They spent the entire day chasing, in vain, as it would turn out. There were a number of sprinters in the front group, but as it was so small, attacks were inevitable. And the one that stuck came from one of the sprinters, Alexander Christophe of Intermarché Wanty-Gobert. That was his 83rd victory as a pro rider, but his first as a solo victor. He's so consistent, though, at taking at least one big win per year, isn't he? In the women's, we had a much bigger group coming to the line, and as such, it was almost inevitable that Lorena Wiebes would take the win. That was her 40th as a pro rider, and she's only 23 years old. Now, if we compare that to the current crop of male stars, as Will Newton did on Twitter, Pogacar has 37 wins at the same age. Evenepoel, 1 year younger, is on 25. But still, Wiebes is some way off Marianne Vos, who already had 76 wins to her name at the age of 23. Unbelievable. Right, I'll move on now to what we've got coming up for you on GCN Plus this week, where our main focus will be on Paris-Roubaix. After 2.5 years without a single edition, this Sunday will be the 4th Paris-Roubaix in just over 6 months. That's going to be the 119th edition of the men's race, and the day before we've got the 2nd edition of the women's. Now, the men's will have live coverage from start to finish, whilst the women's isn't full coverage, but there is more than last year, so we'll get to see all of the sectors of Pavé. I honestly cannot wait for this weekend. A Saturday and Sunday in hell for the riders is a weekend in heaven for me and most of you, I'm sure. The races are available throughout Europe and the Asia Pacific, excluding China, New Zealand and Japan. But the women's race will also be available for our US subscribers to watch. Not the men's though, unfortunately, as another broadcaster has exclusive rights over there. Stay tuned for our big GCN preview coming out this week, and also keep your eyes peeled on the GCN app because there's a whole host of written Paris-Roubaix content coming out this week. We're going to look at the most iconic sectors, the moments that have defined the race, previews, and whether or not Filippo Ganna stands a chance of winning it. That's going to be an interesting one, isn't it? Beyond the cobbles, we have Brabant's Appeal on Wednesday, the men's and women's. That's available in Europe, plus the Asia Pacific, except for China, New Zealand and Australia. The classic Besançon comes on Friday, and on Saturday it's the Tour of Europe. Those are available worldwide, excluding France. We've also got 2 stage races for you this week, with the Tour of Turkey continuing through to Sunday. That's available in Europe and the US, plus the Asia Pacific, excluding China, New Zealand, and also the Tour of Sicily, which runs from tomorrow through to Saturday. That one is available in all GCN Plus territories, except for New Zealand. Beyond the live racing, we've also got the 2nd episode of Back on Track coming out tomorrow. It goes behind the scenes of the UCI Track Champions League, and this episode focuses on the endurance riders, and in particular, the rivalry between Katie Archibald and Kirsten Wild, riding her final races as a pro rider. Just before we get on to other news, the Tour of Turkey kicked off yesterday with a stage that, despite all the climbing, ended up in a bunch sprint. Caleb Ewan emerged victorious after timing his sprint to perfection. Jasper Philipsen was unable to get around him because he didn't have the legs, whilst Caden Groves wasn't able to get around either because there was no room. You can watch the rest of the race unfold this week live on GCN Plus, and it's Nairo Quintana who's the big favourite, but he might not have it all his own way. In other news, the route for this year's Tour of Britain was confirmed last week, and it includes a stage that finishes very close to my home, which I'm pretty excited about. The race has its most northerly start and most southerly finish ever, kicking off where it finished off last year in Aberdeen in Scotland and finishing on the Isle of Wight, with both of those stages featuring a summit finish. Stage 7 follows the Jurassic coastline from West Bay through to Ferndown, using many of my old training roads along the way, which will probably mean I lose yet more of my Strava KOMs. The race will run from the 4th to the 11th of September, and it's likely to once again attract a very strong field since it's now a great preparation race for the World Championships. Egan Bernal is back on his bike and seems to be training pretty hard already. He clocked up quite a few rides of over 100 kilometres in distance over the last 10 days. Now, he is still hoping to resume racing at some point this year, which would be pretty miraculous given how serious his crash and injuries were. Sonny Colbrelli's return to racing is in a lot of doubt after he was fitted with an internal defibrillator. Italian law, which was set in 2017, forbids anyone with an internal defibrillator from competing in elite sport. Now, the UCI has yet to comment on this matter, but regardless of whether Colbrelli competes again or not, we wish him all the best in his recovery. That is all for this week, but I look forward to seeing you again for our Paris-Roubaix preview show later on in the week. Goodbye for now, though.